downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Master of Wine Richard Kershaw started out as a chef, but then switched to wine instead. After a spell at La Réserve in Hampstead, where the comedian Peter Cook was one of his clients, he worked as a cellar hand in various countries before moving to South Africa, perfecting his skills at Mulderbosch and Kanu before establishing his own eponymous label in 2012. He's a deep thinker as well as a passionate advocate of cool climate wines. Hello, Richard, and welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you, Tim.
You are, I think, in Elgin because you're getting close to vintage, aren't you?
We are. We are in Elgin. Rainy as it is at the moment, it's throwing it down. And we started a little bit of Pinot Noir last week and one of our Chardonnays from the lower Davenport River. But at the moment, Elgin is just beginning.
That's pretty early, isn't it, for Pinot Noir?
It is, and it's actually the earliest on record. The earliest before was 2016, so it's really an exceptional vintage in that sense. Let's hope it's a good one as well.
Yeah, let's hope so. I mean, that's climate change, I suppose, isn't it?
I think climate change has partly, but we didn't have any rain for many months during the spring and summer, and also we had a very even temperature, no heat spikes, so we just got this constant ripening right through the day. It didn't shut down at all, which is a good thing. But it does mean we've obviously we've got the grapes have accelerated to ripeness at a ridiculous speed.
Yeah, so you're not going anywhere, are you? Well, the vineyards.
No.
Listen, I want to talk to you a little bit about your upbringing because I always start with that with this podcast. And you were born and brought up in Sheffield, in the centre of England. Just any wine in your upbringing?
Yes. As I say, I was born as far from the sea as possible, and both my mother and father were very. They loved their wines. My father, in particular, they were divorced. Actually, I should mention. So I brought up my father. He drank some smart. He loved his Burgundies and so on and so forth. My mother was a little more reticent. She sort of liked the sort of easy drinking specials that you could get. But ultimately, I was brought up in an environment where wine was being served for sure.
And your mum was a cook, wasn't she?
She was, yes. In those days, she was one of those that didn't go to university, of course, but did go to finishing school where they learned how to cook, sort of cordon bleu type cooking. And she was extremely good, very adventurous for her sort of age group. Whilst my father was actually also a very good cook, and he had learnt a lot. And he actually used to do functions, and he even ran a small country hotel at one point, doing everything.
And so, I mean, no surprise that you became a chef, basically. I mean, where did you train? How long did you do that for?
So I'd only trained for a couple of years as a chef, and basically it was largely because I wasn't particularly good at school, and this seemed an outlet to be able to apply my sort of credentials. But that's basically I sort of became a chef then, and obviously worked then in a restaurant and hotel.
And you did that for a couple of years?
Yeah, just a couple of years. One in actually just outside London in Marlow, and the other one up in the Lake District in Ambleside in the middle of nowhere, which for a 21-year-old is not a very exciting place to be.
No, exactly. It's a slightly cheesy connection to make, but cooking and winemaking, do they have stuff in common?
Well, I think, yes. I think the concept of winemaking and food is very, very interlinked, not least because when I was taught as a chef, you have to serve the food at the table. So basically, we had to do this, what they call the gueridon style. I was taught by a chef from the Savoy. And part of that...
So you cook at the table, basically, do you?
You do. You actually cook at the table, and you sort of do your crêpes Suzettes and your dressings and your deboned chicken and all sorts. So it was a sort of a very much a sighted kind of thing, a spectacle, which I think has gone out of fashion. Although recently I was in Cape Town and there was a restaurant that's starting to do that. But effectively that, and also the fact that if you were obviously making food, you had the opportunity to serve wine with it. And I got interested because that was like a side topic that we had to learn, and ended up doing my certificate and higher certificate courses. So it was kind of an all-in-one thing.
So certificate, higher certificate, Wine and Spirit Education Trust, which is a kind of a global exam, really, that everybody does. Well, not everybody does, but a lot of people do who want to get into wine, yeah?
They do, absolutely, yes. I mean, in those days, in this day and age, we call it level 1, 2, 3, and diplomas, I believe, is level 4. But yes, It was a sort of a step into an area where you start at least your journey into wine.
So when did you think, okay, maybe I can make wine my life?
I think, firstly, it was the fact that I ended up going to leaving the chefing to become basically a retail manager in a store and in Hampstead of all places. And basically from there, I decided that wine could be an interesting use because I was studying for my Master of Wine. So effectively, having finished my diploma, I wanted to actually embark on wine because it seemed to be something like cooking you could do with your hands, and therefore it was sort of a natural progression, I felt.
So that's another connection really between the two, yeah?
Another connection, exactly.
Mm. And the physical, and they also involve a degree of blending, we could call it that, could we?
I think so, yes. I mean, I suppose like cooking, you need all the right ingredients. You need to be able to source them properly, which is definitely the case for wine. And then you need to be, in a sense, one of the joys of high-level cooking, like wine, is not to inveigle yourself, sort of massage the components to an excellent position, and then you're going to have diners enjoying it without having to sort of layer upon layer of sort of sauces and bastes and things that just try to get the best out of something which isn't actually good in the first place. So I think wine is very similar to that. You
can't hide bad ingredients, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you worked in Hampstead, you were at La Réserve. Just tell us the story about Peter Cook, because you've told me that story. It's a great story.
Yes.
Peter Cook, for those who are not English, was a very, very famous English comedian who did something called Pete and Dud with Dudley Moore.
Yeah. So we had a number of actors in Hampstead. I mean, there's a lot of thespians running around there, and a lot of them actually were our clients in the shop. And importantly, we had a book, so they all had accounts. And so they would come in and sort of buy their wares. Peter Cook was one of those. And we had an incident, unfortunately, an unfortunate incident where we had an armed robbery. And I was held up actually at gunpoint with 2 sawn-off shotguns. It was about as sort of as London as you could be at the time. And basically we ended up, or rather these chaps locked me in the back. In one of these long shops with a big facing window, and I was sort of locked in the toilet, and they proceeded to rob me actually of £50. So they didn't get much, but they did get a whole bunch of champagne, and they made their way across to the tube. But during this period, I was sort of sitting there. I yelled out for help until I did get a chap coming in, and it was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and I got a chap coming in, and he basically sort of rang the police, as you would expect. I effectively came out like this, but just before I got out of the toilet, there was another ring, and in came Peter Cook. And I just want to quickly, I didn't sort of surface this, but Peter Cook was unfortunately an alcoholic, and he came in and he bought his half a bottle of vodka, 4 Fosters, and occasionally in the afternoon, if he came in again, bought a bottle of Chateau Shit, which was effectively a champagne called Beaumont de Caillere, which he could never pronounce. So ultimately, that was his thing. But he came in the morning in his bedroom slippers, and we used to have a lot of fun. But then in the afternoon, if he came in, we knew he was on a talk show, or I knew he was on a talk show, because he would need to be builded up with an extra fortification. But anyway, it was 2:00 in the afternoon, and he came in whilst I was in the back, basically locked in, and the chap said, "Well, listen, you're going to have to leave the shop." In the process, I couldn't face it. I put my head in my hands thinking this is all I needed. Anyway, a few moments later, the police arrived, PC plot, knocked the door down, and then we proceeded to then go to the front where the till is. And the chap interviewed me and asked me, what had happened. And the policeman put his big, folder that they have, the clipboard, on the counter. The counter was actually full of this tissue paper that many people used to use to wrap bottles. And he proceeded to then lift his clipboard to talk to me. But underneath the clipboard, on the paper, was basically written, "Dear Richard, you have been robbed of half a bottle of vodka, 4 Fosters, and a bottle of Chateau Shit. Signed signed Peter Cook." And to which the policeman took adversity and immediately radioed ahead with his little receiver on his lapel and said, "We've got a suspect, Peter Cook. Please keep your eyes out and look for him." At which point, I was sort of basically treading water, and I said, "Listen, that's actually the comedian. If did you know him?" And of course, he didn't. He was actually too young, so he actually didn't find it funny that I'd said he was a comedian. But in this sort of comedic way, I basically explained flailingly until the phone rang. I picked up the phone, and all I could hear then was Peter Cook on the phone. It was the early stage of mobile phones, and he said to me in that beautiful voice that he uses, which he did. He said, "Hello, Richard." And I said, "Hello, Peter. I can see you. I can see you. And I was, I turned around and he was right in the bottom corner of the window outside, looking at me and obviously the policeman. And I said, well, the police are looking for you. He said, should I scarp her? I said, you better scarp her like that.
They never got him, right?
They never got him, no.
I love it. So anyway, he went from that, Peter Cook and La Réserve, and you moved into wine. And you did it really the hard way in a way, didn't you? In that you started from the bottom up, you started working vintages and working in cellars, and you travelled around the world, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I mean, like all these good things, I didn't have a degree in winemaking. I didn't have a degree full stop. So I had my sort of experience in retail, and I ended up traveling to America, firstly, actually, to do my research paper or the dissertation in those days of the Master of Wine, and then got myself involved in doing a stage, which I thought was the best way to learn more about winemaking. The two aren't related in a sense, but they are a very useful use of my time.
The stage was in America, was it?
The stage was in California. And that's where I began. And fortunately, meeting people along the way, looking for work, I ended up actually in Bordeaux, followed by Chile, and then Chile followed by Bordeaux, and then I did a stage in the Pfalz in Germany, and then in Hungary, before then relocating to South Africa at the end of '98.
Mm. And so what took you to South Africa?
Well, initially, when I was going to make wine in Chile, I had the opportunity to have 4 weeks in South Africa and 4 weeks in Argentina. You sort of bought these cheap round-the-world tickets. So I enabled myself to do that. And in the 4 weeks I was there, I very rather nicely met somebody, Mariette, and we kind of had a little relationship or fling, I suppose you'd call it. And then when I returned from Chile, after correspondence, in those days it was email or letters, and we ended up in London, where we actually went straight to France to where I was working and actually trying to learn French better.
I mean, do you think the fact that you had no formal training has helped you in a way? I mean, you learned on the job, really, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it has. I think with no formal training, you've got various facets. You basically have to learn, as you say, on the job. You want to learn because you actually take an interest in it from a more mature point of view, like a postgraduate. So you actually really start learning and whatever. And also you're not prone or hidebound by particular rules or specifics that you perhaps learned in college, although that was something I only learned later. And I think in that sense, it was an incredibly useful exercise. And also importantly, I chose the countries with an eye to different makes or types of winemaking. Chile was obviously bulk. Bordeaux was quite a high-end winery. Obviously, Hungary was Tokai, so it was sweet wines. Germany was sort of aromatic varieties. And California, in a sense, was where I started. But it was a good introduction to, fairly high Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, because I was in the Sonoma Valley. So yeah, it all kind of came together as a learning curve on the hoof, I suppose.
No, quite considered and well thought out. I like that. And when you got to South Africa, you worked at Mulderbosch with the amazing Mike Dobrovich. What did you learn from Mike?
I think I learned the chemistry. And whilst I was there, he suggested I did a first year chemistry. So I did actually partake in that to give myself a little more understanding of the process. But he was a great understander of microbiology and biochemistry. So he was a mentor in the sense that he knew how to make great wines, but he also was somebody who took a deep scientific interest in what was going into the wines and the various reactions and vehicles or movements that the wines have. And he actually did a bit of speaking about it at the time. So yeah, he was a very interesting guy.
And he sort of specialised in what, Chenin and Sauvignon Blanc to a degree?
Yeah, when I first arrived in '99, when I first started, it was very much Sauvignon Blanc. He actually worked at Hunters in New Zealand in the early '90s, so he was one of the first in South Africa to bring in the concept of reductive techniques, which was more widespread elsewhere, but certainly not so much in South Africa. And he then moved into Chenin, which we were making, but not actually as much. And then that became a more core focused brand. And then we moved. We did do Chardonnay. We were very white orientated, apart from the Faithful Hound, which was a red.
The famous Faithful Hound, which was the sort of Bordeaux style blend, wasn't it?
It was, exactly, and it was one of the only ones that was only from the farm. So it was an interesting dynamic, and yes, it was a special wine.
I mean, you then worked at Kanu, which was part of the same group, and you became group winemaker. So you must have been thinking by then, hey, I'm actually quite good at this. Was there a point when you thought, I could do this? This is my career?
Yes, I think at that point I did. I got more confident, and obviously understanding the science behind it helped me a little bit gain that confidence. And running those wineries, especially because they were on different sort of levels, I suppose, gave me much more confidence in what I was doing. I think, like all these things, you keep pressing the education. I was always learning and trying to get it more educational. Actually, because you don't have a fallback. When you don't have a degree or anything, you just worked in a winery. You don't have a plan B, so you just keep learning and going forwards. And also during the time I was just before I became group winemaker in 06, I'd actually re-embarked on the MW course. So I was having this opportunity not just to be a better winemaker in situ, but also to be more aware of wine as a whole.
Yeah, because you tried to do it quite young, didn't you? You were 23 or something ridiculous, and then presumably you didn't pass, and therefore you went back again with a bit more knowledge and experience, yeah?
I did, yes. And at 23, I was just young and angry and full of my own opinions, which is not really required for exam. And so I had to come back a slightly more mature person. And basically that's what I did. I re-entered the course in 2006. I was persuaded by a friend of mine and a late friend called Phil Tuck, who I know you know or knew.
Yeah.
And he basically said, well, why don't you do the course? You were quite good at it. I think he said it more aggressively than that. Like you should get on with it.
Sounds like him.
Yes, exactly. And I did. And that was kind of my sort of re-entry back into something, which was a great thing in retrospect. It was a chance to renew
so second time round you passed, which is fantastic. The question is why, I mean, there's something like 420 or something of us, I certainly lose count, but there are very few who are full-time winemakers who are masters of wine. Why is that, do you think?
I think largely with regard to the winemaking, winemakers is I was asked this question literally last week, and I think a lot of winemakers wouldn't see it as a necessity, and it isn't. They are winemakers through and through, and that there isn't any need to necessarily learn more, because whilst one says it's wine appreciation, the Master of Wine covers a number of facets for us to be more aware of the world of wine, and I think many winemakers aren't their interests. So in a way, they've got their job, they've got their degree, they're in a thing, they can make great wines. And I think in that sense, that's why they've sort of not become master of wine. And yes, you're right. There's about, I think 11 or 12 of us, plus a few what I call consultants who have their own projects running. I'm not sure if they're actually there, but
they think they're winemakers.
Yeah, exactly. There's about 12 of us who are literally going into the winery every day.
In there, yeah, every day, yeah. I mean, what made you want to set up your own label? And you did that. What was your first vintage? 2012.
Yes, 2012 was my first vintage, and effectively it was something that I'd considered. In 2006, I had the opportunity to buy land in Elgin, and I bought a 40-hectare farm. And whilst I hadn't planted it, I was thinking that this could be something I should do. I still am thinking.
You haven't planted it yet.
Yeah, I know. 20 years later, I still haven't planted the damn thing, but for other reasons. And I think but the main premise being is that I actually, I felt that this was an opportunity to do my own thing. And there was a couple of incidents that happened that actually just spurred me on to do it, not least the fact that I passed the Master of Wine about 5 days before I started the business. So yes, there was definitely that. And a few other things that happened when I was at Mulderbosch towards the tail end of me leaving.
I mean, you're focused pretty much exclusively on the cool climate of Elgin. Just for people who've never been there, tell us a bit about Elgin. Where is it in South Africa? What makes it unusual?
So Elgin is actually only about 80 kilometres from Cape Town. It's sort of east of Cape Town and southeast of Stellenbosch by 50 kilometres. What is interesting about it is it's in a raised plateau, and I always refer to the area as a saucer that's just raised up. We're surrounded by mountains. 500 meters on the front, 1,500 meters on the back. And therefore you have a very different climatic sort of metrics there that you don't have in other areas. And I think for those listening, one of the big things with South Africa, it is a very small, in terms of compact wine region, not small, but a compact area where the topography plays a huge part in what it delivers as a climate sort of metrics. So Stellenbosch is merely 50 to 16 kilometers away, where they're making superb Bordeaux blends, whereas in Elgin we're very much Pinot and Chardonnay, and the difference between sort of Burgundy and Bordeaux can't be more stretched in their distance being 700 kilometres and ours being not even 60. But it is very much based on the proximity to the sea, where we're between 9 and 20 kilometres from the sea. we are 300 to 550 meters above sea level. So there's a certain amount of cooling air that comes in. But secondly, I think, or thirdly, is we get a lot of cloud cover. The southeast of the predominant prevailing wind, which everybody who comes to South Africa experiences in the summer, will tend to give us cloud cover. And we actually get these high levels of cloud coming in, and thus it builds up filtration for the UV light, which then not just cools the temperature down, but it also actually brings it effectively means that the ripening of the grapes is slower, longer, phenolically, and we don't get as much sugar ripeness through a hormone called abscisic acid, which pushes sugars to the grape bunches. Therefore, our potential alcohols are lower. And actually today I'm sitting here and it's throwing down with rain.
We can hear the rain outside.
We actually have something very unusual today. We have something called a black southeaster, where the wind has been so strong that you're actually creating rainfall as well. So suddenly you get these huge dumps of rain, which you wouldn't have normally expected at a time of year when it's supposed to be a bit warmer than it is today.
And people will have heard of places like Constantia and Stellenbosch, which are very old wine producing areas, going back to the mid sort of 17th century. Elgin's much more recent, isn't it? I mean, when were grapes planted there in the modern era?
So grapes were effectively planted from 1989, and the only reason they were even planted was a confident young lady who wrote a dissertation or a thesis on cool climate. She picked out that Elgin was the coolest one that she could find, and then decided to give a report in 1987 to the farmers, which, given that they are apple farmers through and through, were interested to hear her speak, but didn't really want to do much about it. However, they did on certain pieces of land, Paul Kluwer, Oak Valley, and then Whitehall, which is made famous by Neil Ellis, did plant a little bit of grapes, merely because they had nothing else planted there. And that was the sort of start of it. It was very, very staccato to start with. And it was only really in 94 when deregulation happened that South Africa went onto the market internationally and had the slightly wrong apples, that there was a little more interest in planting apples, ripping out apples and planting grapes.
And that's the wrong apples.
The wrong apple. Well, yes, they came in with their golden delicious, which, of course, in the Europe, we were sort of like, okay, those aren't that interesting. so they needed to replant. And there was no better thing to start looking at vineyards. And I hasten to add, it is an apple region still. We're 8,000 hectares of apples and pears and only 800 hectares of vineyards. Right. But since then, we have gone slowly more and more grapes. So that's kind of a positive sign, but we're still only 10% of the...
Yeah, but very high quality. I mean, it's hard in Elgin to produce cheap stuff, isn't it, really?
It is. We are against a little bit of the elements. It's a very wet place. So we have over 1,000 mills, which, for those looking, that's more than Seattle and Paris and definitely London. And therefore, we do suffer a little bit. And there's no areas that, with 800 hectares, you're never going to see bulk wines. There's no previous co-op or whatever. It's an area where there's an opportunity cost too. And I think it's worth mentioning that, we are competing against apples as much as that may bring a smile to people. The fact is they are very, very profitable. Apples are, I believe in 2011, the Elgin region was the most profitable cash crop for apples in the Southern Hemisphere. So you're really dealing with something that if you're going to plant grapes, you're going to have to plant good quality grapes. I mean, it's a great shame we don't have any Chenin here because they see that as a low price ceiling, which at the bottom end certainly is. But it's sort of been a really Chardonnay Pinot focus. And that's hence why, if you're going to grow grapes, you've got to plant grapes that are going to go and fetch higher prices in the long
run.
Go
high end, yeah. I mean, you've got these 40 hectares of land that you haven't planted, so you don't actually own any vineyards, or you own land, but no vineyards. So where do you source grapes from? You buy from growers based on farmers, do you?
I do, yes. It's that cliche, the virtual winery. So you basically go off and buy grapes from various farmers, which is a very big thing, obviously, as you know, more than me in South Africa. And I source it from the Elgin region. We actually make a different range, which is not from Elgin, but largely I've worked with all the different farmers. There's about, I think, I'm working with something like 9 or 10 in a region that's very small. So a lot that sell me Chardonnay, Pinot, and also a bit of Syrah. And then I work outside in a regions of interest to me as well.
But they're all cool climate, aren't they, basically? You're not buying them from the Swartland.
So all of them are cool climate. Even if Elgin is the coolest, I'm working with cool climate grapes in what is sort of ambiguously called the Cape South Coast region. So everything towards the south part or east of, southeast of Stellenbosch and beyond to almost to Plettenberg Bay, effectively.
Yeah, we're a long way down the garden route then, yeah?
Yes, it goes a long way down.
And you've got, 4 different levels of wine? You've got Elgin, which is the one that has a blue label on it, not a red stripe, but a blue stripe. You've got GPS, you've got clonal selection, and you've got deconstructed. Just tell us about the 4. Elgin is self-explanatory, I think, but to start with that.
Yeah, so the blue sash is actually the Elgin. So that basically denotes that every grape that's gone into that wine is all from Elgin. And it's what we produce the most. So those are our biggest production, Chardonnay being the biggest, and then Syrah and Pinot take sort of the other half, so to speak, although Pinot's grown in recent years. And those are really sourced from various vineyards around Elgin. GPS, the green sash, is those wines that are not from Elgin. I call it GPS as a great positioning system. So those areas which are interesting that are not necessarily in Elgin.
It's not needing a GPS to get there then?
You probably do, although actually just for those buying those grapes, buying that bottle of wine, you'll see another little thing, a little decal called What 3 Words. And in that, you'll see 3 words, which if you put them into the Google What 3 Words app, which you can actually do both, it will take you to the center of that vineyard. So you can find it on the bottle, but they are generally more removed areas which are interesting in their own right, be they on limestone or they're bush vines. That makes them the quirky.
And then what about clonal and deconstructed?
So, well, the clonal is the blue label, so that's the blue sash, which we've talked about. Then the GPS, and then the deconstructed are effectively all Elgin wines too. But what there is that going to the clonal is made up of different batches, different vineyards. And within those, we actually harvest the clones and the vineyards separately. And the deconstructed are single ones or versions of that. And we make about 3 or 4 of the Chard, 2 of the Pinot, and 2 or 3 of the Syrah. So effectively, there are single vineyards, single clone, and single site, just to make life even more complicated.
I'm interested in, because you're known for these clonal wines. I mean, I always get confused about which is which, but I think I've got them now over the years. I just wonder how big a difference does a clone make, and what about rootstocks? I mean, are any of these clones on their own roots, or are they all grafted?
So no, all the vines are grafted, and effectively the grafting is mostly with 10114, which has an ability to withstand a little bit more moisture that we get. But we also have a bit of Richter 110 and US 7/8, which is a newer clone, a newer rootstock. But largely the clone is dictating the flavor profile. And like all these things, effectively when I look at the metrics that make up a good wine, I think that climate obviously has most of what to do with it. If you're not in the right area, you're not really going to make the right sort of wine. There's lots of limestone in Joburg, but you can't actually use that because the climate's wrong. The soil is clearly a very important part, and that's going to give you the direction the wine will go. Plus your vineyard husbandry, plus your winemaking, and clearly to try and do as little as possible is very much what we're trying to achieve. The clone is only adding to the extra, the seasoning on the top, which pushes the wine from, an extra 2% or an extra 3%. It's a bit like, in the scoring, in a world of scoring, I suppose, it's like making that wine from a 92, 93 to a 95, just by simply, the flavor profile of the clone is adding an extra dimension. If you've gone to the level of actually splitting it up and adding it judiciously to what is our clonal selection, which is the final wine.
Was South Africa held back by bad clonal material in the past?
It was, yeah. I mean, the late Jan Bullen-Coetzee was well known for bringing in clones illegally at times.
In his suitcase.
The 95 was accredited to him bringing it in. Now, clearly, unfortunately, fortunately, during apartheid, there was sanctions, and those sanctions meant that there was no clonal material, and therefore South Africa developed its own. And there are South African Chardonnay clones, for example, and others that were developed here. Luckily, the older vines like the Chenin's and the Semillons were there anyway. But the newer sort of varieties, not saying new, but those varieties didn't have new clones. So Chardonnay, Pinot, the Dijon clones were available to an extent, but not in the amount that we get now. Syrah was a little more challenging. Syrah doesn't have a lot of clones because of its, unfortunately, it has Shiraz decline. And therefore, a lot of the French clones didn't make it here. So effectively, yes, clonal material was hard to get to, but once the sanctions were lifted and the 90s began, we were able to get all the clonal material that everybody is able to get around the world.
And Shiraz decline is what, dead arm? Is what they call dead arm in Australia?
it's not quite UTIPA, but it's basically affecting the trunk, and that gives you that sort of it curtails its lifespan effectively. So unfortunately, it's been seen on about 3 clones that now are not allowed into South Africa.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, you developed very early on this reputation for Chardonnay, and, I think you're rightly regarded as one of the best Chardonnay producers in South Africa and possibly even the New World, actually. What's your secret? I mean, are there things that you do to all of the batches of Chardonnay, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
It's generally, I can do handstands and wear red shorts. That's generally what makes it all work.
That helps, right?
So no, I basically are. I think it's trying to dig down into the roots, and possibly not having that degree or whatever, or perhaps having it or having the ability to dig down. Is I've taken each of the clones that I use, but also the soil types, and in Elgin there's about 3 or 4 main predominant soil types, and worked out how they work with this clone itself, and then basically used a sort of rubric or algorithm to match the clone and the soil type to a set of barrels. Now, how that manifests is that we take 11 parcels for the Chardonnay as an example, and we split them into 21 batches, each of them aligned to different amounts of new wood, but also different coopers. Different coopers have a different effect on the wine. And certain clones will only get a little bit of new wood, depending on the soil type, and others will get a lot more. Each of them have interesting sounding names: 95, CY96, CY548, CY76, CY277, all of them thought of by Burgundy professors, probably in Dijon, late at night after a couple of Pernod. So basically,
it sounds like a bus timetable, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Exactly, it does. It's the route through Shoreditch. But the basic, it's a sort of interesting concept. But all of these have a part to play. They all have different types of flavor profiles, and as such, trying to put them together, depending on obviously the soil and how that's sort of puts them, is me being able to actually put them in the different sort of algorithms that I use. But then, importantly, following that is the ability to taste the barrels. And if anything, the MW has given me the opportunity to taste much better than I did. And whilst winemakers are good tasters, often technical tasters, I don't think they'd be offended by that, because they are brilliant technical tasters. But sometimes the ability to taste in a more structured way, that's sort of drilled into you, enables you to look at the wine in a double way, in a technical winemaker way and a structured way. And actually tasting those wines every 8 weeks, which is what we do, gives us a little bit more insight into the different components that make them up. And one of the points that I often say is we use a sort of like a graph, XY graph, and it's obviously with time and quality in the barrel to judge how the barrels are tasting as they get into line. And clearly some of those barrels will take a dip, maybe because of whatever reason. And our job is to sort of nurture them back. And so instead of giving a sort of blanket formulaic, say, batonnage, we'll take individual barrels that have batonnage. We will stir them, scrape them. Sometimes we want a little bit of oxygen if they're too reductive, and so on and so forth, to make sure that each barrel is brought back into the line of quality. And hopefully by that stage, we'll end up with a half decent wine.
So each barrel is its own world in a way.
It is. And in fact, we go to the extreme of actually analysing every barrel fully. So whilst that's an expensive exercise, it gives us a complete dashboard of each barrel and how they're reacting and how they're maturing. We would like to think they all mature, but ones nearer the door mature differently to ones at the back of the cellar. It's
how interesting.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating.
Yeah. And your other early focus was Syrah, not Pinot Noir, which came later, which we'll chat about in a minute. What sort of Syrah style were you shooting for? I mean, South Africa is making some amazing Syrahs now, but Elgin's quite distinctive, isn't it?
It is. I think what I was shooting for and what I got, I think was probably two different things, like all good intentions. I was a lover of Syrah from the Rhone, and basically growing up, one of the things my father used to have, and I bought largely because it was still vaguely affordable in the 90s, that I had a lot of Syrah, and I loved those styles that we're making in the Rhone. A little bit less so perhaps in the slightly bigger styles that Australia and South Africa were starting to make as well. But unfortunately, climate change in their region started to push the alcohols up, and I love a bit more alcohol as much as the next person, but 16% starts to tickle me a bit too much. So I ended up thinking that maybe this is the style that I could do in Elgin. It's a cool climate. It's going to have lower alcohols potentially, and it's also going to have good acidity. And the peppery notes, those rotundo notes, which is really interesting, which was starting to be baked out in some of the Rhone wines, was things that I thought we could capture in Elgin. As it happened, I think the wines are definitely a lot lighter, medium weight styles of wine. Jans has called them the Pinot style of Syrah. And I think it's a great term because they aren't kind of what you would expect Syrah. I think they're hard to pick up. You do pick up a little bit of the peppery notes, but you pick up other characters which adorn them, which I think are fascinating. But in a region where Syrah isn't easy to grow, it's a medium riper, but it still ripens at a time when we get rain. So it has proved quite a challenging wine to make. When it is made and it works, I think it's a fantastically different interpretation from what we have in South Africa. We have the Swartland style, we have the Stellenbosch style, and we have what I would like to feel is sort of a cool climate.
Cool climate style.
Or whether it's an Elgin style, there's not enough probably to really use that as a stylistic. But yes.
Yeah. Was Pinot a more daunting prospect in a way?
It was. And in all honesty, before when I was at Mulderbosch, we did make Syrah or Shiraz, and we made Chardonnay, but we didn't make Pinot. And Pinot was something I started making in 2012. And in fact, I actually made it for Naked Wines, which I worked with. And effectively, I was learning. And I think it was a big learning curve, notwithstanding that Pinot itself has always been behind Chardonnay in terms of quality, in terms of, I always look at Burgundy and say, well, in Chardonnay terms, we've got some pretty good. We can stand shoulder to shoulder with them. I think with Pinot, a little bit less so perhaps, but we can do a damn good job. And I think that I needed to get to that point, and that was why we only first released our wines in 2015.
Okay, so you'd actually made one, but you just weren't happy with it.
That's right. Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about image, because South Africa, sadly, I think it's still dogged by this cheap and cheerful image, especially places like the UK and Holland to a degree, maybe the States as well. A lot of it's wine shipped in bulk, but you're at a much higher level and you're selling your wines at good prices. Is the image of South Africa changing? And I just wonder what steps you would take to improve the image that it has around the world.
Gosh, I think certainly the image is changing. I think there's definitely a fascination, not just withstanding that we have all these virtual wineries all doing incredible things, and people really get attracted to them. I can say this: I was in London last week with Hallgarten, and there was, that people come over to South Africa because it's a place that's really happening. It's enabled itself, in my opinion, because we've always had what I call the mom and pop wineries. Now, it sounds a bit sort of twee that, but it's those wineries where you had owners and families which could own a winery, and they weren't owned by the bigger estates. Chile's always, I think, had the ability to be massive wineries, and they can make huge presences, but you can't get smaller producers. It's hard there. Their young, vibrant scene is a little more limited than in South Africa. And I think that's the one thing that South Africa does do. But I think the image came, unfortunately, from entering the market with probably the wrong wine. So therefore, price was the lever to reduce that price. But I do think we've started to change and move around the corner. I think also South Africa itself is, unfortunately, how can I say, sort of slightly throttled by its ability or its inability to market itself. The AWRI in Australia has huge amounts of money that the government sponsors to put money into promoting Australian wines around the world. And I mean, they themselves have struggled. South Africa, the Wines of South Africa is not government funded. The government has no real interest in funding it for various reasons, and therefore it's a tough one. That the Australians are sort of booking out the sort of largest centre and whatever, and the South Africans are in a wine shop in the bottom bunker of some New York sort of retailer. So basically, kind of, we're saddled with that problem, and therefore it's hard to get there. But I think. And sorry, lastly, I would also say there is an interest. I think actually Holland and the UK have sort of came about with a sort of cheap and cheerful. And that generation that was brought up in that largely also was brought up, you could say the boomers and moving into Generation X, but they were brought up on cheap and cheerful wine. I mean, I remember back in the day, Bulgarian wine, was very much of the thing. Then Chile, and then of course South Africa. So it was really whatever was on discount. I don't think the country was necessarily even that important. It was whatever Tesco sold at a cheap price. But now we do take an interest in it. We are interested in its source, its sustainability, and so on and so forth. And I think South Africa tells a good story there because we have our own biosphere, we have our own sort of, and we have people that actually travel and are the winemakers. Often winemaker owner doing their own thing. I think the other thing is that's happened in the UK and Holland largely because of travel. People love coming here from those countries. America is starting to happen because we do have a lot of flights now going to America. So there's an interest in it. But I know one of my friends, Sam from Lismore, she often says she's American herself. And I mean, she says it's just on the other side of the world. You know, we are irrelevant and America is kind of its own little internal thing. So why would anybody come to South Africa? But I think that's slowly happening. And certainly the Far East is an interest too. But it is an image that's taking a long time to shred. But I think it is starting or finally being shredded.
So our big change would be government funding, really get some money out of the government to I mean, the wine industry is so important to the image of South Africa. I think we've talked about travel and I mean, okay, it's based in the winelands, so it's only a part of the country, but I think it's an enormous shop window really for the country to get tourism to go there. And, you know, South Africa is a great place to go on holiday. The food's great. You know, the wines are great. You know, people are very welcoming. You can get into all of the estates pretty much. And, you know, and it's just a nice place to be, really.
Yes, it is. And in all fairness, that's actually where I think South Africa's bonus is. We have huge amounts of tourism coming back now after COVID, and there's year-on-year increases of double digits, huge double digits. And I think that you're right. So, funnily enough, circling back to the food, that's definitely part of it. We have some great restaurants. Unfortunately, we don't have Michelin, but we do have great restaurants, and the Michelin guys.
You don't need Michelin.
We don't need bloody Michelin. Yeah, exactly.
Keep them.
But we do have great restaurants, and I think people do know. And what's nice is there's word of mouth. They're going back to, you know, the countries of origin and talking about the wine. So I think there is definitely an interest. And I think it's an exciting scene too. We have a lot of different wines that are poking the sort of the interest piquing the interest of people.
To me, I mean, you know, I write about lots of places, but I think the places that over-deliver most in the world at the moment are probably Spain and South Africa in terms of what you get for your cash. Anyway, final question is, how do you get away from wine? I mean, do you still like to cook?
Yeah, that's a question my wife asks, actually. Are you going to get away from wine? I do cook and I love it. I have two daughters. One of them, well, both of them are good at cooking. One of them is living overseas in London, but the other loves cooking. So does Mariette. But if I have a chance in the kitchen, I will definitely start cooking, and I do love that. I do take a big interest in health, so that's my biggest thing. I'm quite interested in how that works, and especially the wine trade is brutal on health. So basically, that's something that I take a big interest in. Unfortunately, they always say having ADHD is a bad thing in that sense, but it does definitely lead me to. I do love reading about wine and wine journeys and things like that. So I do find that quite an interesting thing, as much it is. But you know, wine is a lighter. It is a candle onto the world of the world. You know, from the Renaissance to the modern age. It's always been an important thing. So I do find that fascinating, even if it's not directly related to winemaking. It's still a hobby.
No, I agree with that. I feel exactly the same. Anyway, listen, Rich, it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you very much. Good luck with this harvest. Let's hope it stops raining, and see you very soon.
Thank you.
Richard may not have a formal winemaking qualification, but he's certainly made up for it since. And I love that story about Peter Cook and Chateau Shit. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Michael Silacci from Opus One in California. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.